friends and professional colleagues. So today our topic is why should we continue the multiple oral anti-diabetic drugs when they are insufficient, and the timely adoption of in-clinic insulin use. A very practical approach. Let's get into the sessions. This is my financial disclosure. And today's topic is been divided into three parts. Part one will be why do we treat people with diabetes? Second, how far does OADs serve the purpose? Third and last will be making up for the deficiency of insulin without delay. And let's see the burden of diabetes in India as per the Atlas of the International Diabetes Federation, the ninth edition, the latest one being in 2019 actually. See, it's very pathetic when we see that over 1 million people died due to diabetes in the last year, that is 2019. It's very pathetic and very hardening. Even in the most advanced, sophisticated care, even at the level of primary physician care or the secondary care, even at the tertiary care, it has been much developed. But still, it's very saddening to see that more than 1 million people died just in the last 1 year, that is 2019. And it says the undiagnosed cases of diabetes are more than somewhere around some 4.6 crores, and the cost per person with diabetes will be somewhere around some 92 the US dollars. That's somewhere around some 7,000, roughly around 7 to 7,500 rupees INR. And when you see the graph on the left side, on the y-axis you can see these people with diabetes in India, that is shown in millions, and on the x-axis you find the years. Actually, it starts from 2003 and 7, 10, 11, 13, 15, 17, 19. So starting from 32.7 million, so it went up to 77 million last year actually. And the projected rate of diabetes in 2045 by IDF is going to be somewhere around 134 million patients of diabetes. This is again it's something like you can call it not a pandemic. It's something like an epidemic only. So 1 in 11 adults have diabetes in India right now. This is according to the IDF Atlas ninth edition. And as you know that high plasma postprandial glucose and the fasting plasma glucose levels contribute to high glycosylated hemoglobin, that is HbA1c levels, as seen in Indian people with diabetes. According to these multiple studies, the IDCA and the DAP care and A1C, A1 achieve and the present and the improve. You can see the numbers also the included in each of the study, like it is somewhere around some 1,66,000 in IDCA and 5,272 in DAP care and more than 20,000 554 in A1C achieve, and the present it is 3,559 and improve it is 17,491. And the A's and years is somewhere around some like differs from study to study, somewhere around some 54.95 in IDCI and 51.9 in DAP care, and A1C achieve it is the 50.8 the mean year, and in present it is 53.4 and improve it is 59. And you can see the fasting plasma glucose and the postprandial plasma glucose roughly around some different studies have different these things, like fasting plasma glucose is 170 plus and 148 in DAP care and 194 and 194 and 192.6 in improve. And likewise you can see the postprandial glucose that is 251 in IDCI, and the DAB care is 205, and the 288 the A1C, and that is then the A1C achieve, and the present is 285, and improve it is 260. And put together the fasting plasma glucose and the postprandial plasma glucose, both of them contribute in determining the A1C. You can see the A1C levels like the 8.52%, 8.9%, and 9.2%, and 9.23%, and 9.3%. And human and healthcare cost of diabetes in India approximately like the annual human cost is if you take the diabetic kidney disease, it is 89.13 lakh cases, and if you take diabetic eye disease, let it be the diabetic retinopathy, the non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, NPDR or PDR, the proliferative diabetic retinopathy, or even the macular edema, even put together even the cataract also, the premature cataract, what we see in diabetes very commonly, is including glaucoma also, like it's around some 71.90 lakh cases. And when you take the coronary artery disease, that is 70.91 lakh cases, and the diabetic limb disease or amputation, that is LLEA, what we call lower limb extremity amputation, that is somewhere around let it be the peripheral artery disease or the peripheral vascular disease, it is somewhere around 20.87 lakh cases. And the annual healthcare cost for treating diabetes is somewhere around 54,000 crores, that is INR. So it's a vast amount of expenditure, and mainly the diabetes is affecting the people at the productive age. That is making the nation crippled. You have to keep in mind. And the landmark studies have showcased the importance of good control to improve outcomes. And these are the studies you can find on the left side, the DCCT bar EDIC, and the UKPDS, and the ACCAD, and the ADVANCE, and the VADT. And the two things you see is light blue is the initial trial, and the white is long-term follow-up. The same study is been followed up, like okay, UKPDS was to start with, that is the United Kingdom prospective diabetes study, and DCCT, the diabetes care and complications trial, and later on it was followed like okay, UKPDS ongoing, that is shown in the showcased in the white boxes. Like you can see, all the microvascular complications are so dependent on the good glycemic control. You can see the reductions in the microvascular complications in the DCCT and EDIC trial, which is basically done in T1 DM people, and the UKPDS done in T2 DM. That's a landmark trial in the history of entire diabetes, the UKPDS, still ongoing, which started in 1977, and the results were evaluated after 10 years, 87, and the results were evaluated even after 20 years, 1997, and even 207 and 207, even after 40 years also the study is going on still, 43 years still it's going on. And the ongoing studies also have shown that there is a downward the reduction in the incidence of microvascular complications when it is concerned with either DCCT or EDIC or UKPDS or ACCAD. And even in ADVANCE and VADT also you find the reduction of microvascular complications. So per se the microvascular complications, the take home message is the microvascular complications of diabetes mellitus are more glycemic dependent rather than the macrovascular complications, which are typically not the glycemic dependent. They are glycemic independent, because you find multiple factors for cardiovascular complications, not only the diabetes, even the hypertension, even the dyslipidemia, even the sedentary lifestyle, even the obesity, even the family history You take so many things, the lipoprotein little a, and several factors coming to action when it is concerned with this macrovascular complications, especially the cardiovascular complications, that is called the atherosclerotic cardiovascular complications, that is either the stroke or the coronary artery disease or the heart failure, and you find in the all studies, starting from DCCT to VADT, the initial trial has shown neutral towards the cardiovascular complications, and the ongoing, you can see in the DCCT, EDIC, and the UKPDS, there is a downward trend towards the cardiovascular complications as you reduce the glycemic targets, as you maintain the good glycemic control. The complications of the cardiovascular issues also, they just go down. And according to the ACCORD and the ADVANCE, it is neutral, and according to VADT, there is a downward trend in the risk of cardiovascular complications. And when it comes to mortality, it is in neutral when you take this DCCT, EDIC, and the UKPDS, and the mortality is reduced in the ongoing, that is the Latran, that's what after the 1997, after 20 years, after 30 years, the mortality started going down, even in the type 1 population, even in the type 2 population, that is basically the UKPDS and the DCCT and EDIC have shown that. And the ACCORD and ADVANCE and VADT were neutral when compared to this. And the mortality increased in ACCORD actually in the initial trial. This is the one take-home message according to this particular ACCORD. And when we come to this, the percentage of reduction, each 1% reduction in the glycated hemoglobin HbA1c reduces the risk of chronic diabetes complications. That is, you can very clearly see that 1% of reduction in the HbA1c is associated with a 21% reduction in the deaths related to diabetes, and 14% risk reduction in the heart attacks, and 12% reduction in the stroke incidence, and 37% risk reduction in the microvascular disease, that is especially what we have mentioned, the microvascular disease, either the diabetic retinopathy or the diabetic neuropathy or the diabetic kidney disease, is more dependent on the blood sugar levels when compared to the cardiovascular complications, which are multifactorial in origin. So they are not glucose dependent totally, but there is some amount of, definitely you find 14% reduction in the heart attacks and the 12% reduction in the strokes, and drastic reduction is seen like 43% of relative risk reduction is seen with LLEA, that's what I said, lower limb extremity amputation or fatal peripheral vascular disease, or otherwise known as PAD, the fatal peripheral arterial disease. So you find overall like 1% reduction of HbA1c is able to achieve this so many the risk reductions in the complications, the chronic complications of diabetes. So if we can get back to the normalcy, that is the target of 6.5 to 7% of A1C, like the patient would be absolutely fine. You can reduce the burden of complications, thereby you can reduce the total burden of the economical burden on the patient, thereby you can improve the economy of the nation. And coming to the second part of our topic, how far does OID serve the purpose? Yes. See, absolutely. See, I cannot just say that you have to take off all OIDs and start insulin. That is not my funda, and that is not evidence-based medicine also. because type 2 diabetes is always it's a progressive disease. Absolutely, it's a progressive disease, and there is some changes in the theories, like when we were taught way back in like 30 years ago, 3 decades ago, we were taught in such a way that by the time you diagnose a case of T2DM, 50% of the beta cells would be dead. That was the funda which we were taught when we were postgraduate students. And later on, this was postulated by DiFranco only. Ralph A. DiFranco, who is considered to be one of the pioneers in the modern diabetology. And later on, it so changed in 2012 or 13. I just remember in one of the ADA's scientific sessions, I think 2010 or 2012, then DiFranco has postulated a new hypothesis saying that by the time you diagnose the case of type 2 diabetes, more than 80% of the beta cells are dead. That is the latest funda. From 50%, it has moved. Maybe as the severity moves, the death rate of the beta cell that increases proportionately. Now we will see this addition of subsequent OADs offer diminishing benefits. Yes, and you can see here the mean HbA1c on the y-axis. On the x-axis, you find the multiple regimes, that is the number of OADs, either it is 2 or 3 or 4, are with insulin, you can see. And the navy blue, like dark blue, is pre-treatment, and the gray is post-treatment. So when the patient is on 2 OADs, when the patient's baseline HbA1c is somewhere around some 9%, say you take 9%, you find a reduction in the A1C by 1%. That is okay. You can see that the patient has achieved an A1C of 8%, and when you take it with 3 OADs, the percentage of reduction was it was only like 0.5% reduction, and when the patient was on 4 OADs, that is almost meaningless and senseless, because 3 OADs is more, and the 4th OAD should not be initiated, and preferably you should start with a basal insulin. High time you have to get back to insulin. And the annual death rate of the beta cell is 4% per annum. So roughly around span of 4 to 5 years, the patient has got almost, he becomes like pancreatic bankrupt, and you don't find any functioning beta cell mass and functioning no secreting insulin cells at all in the pancreas. So after 4 OADs, you find the very paradox you find here is the A1C is increased by 0.2%, and the insulin when it is added to like the insulin, it's not very clear in this slide whether it is to the existing OADs or insulin alone. I think it's insulin alone. I think it's the reduction of A1C is 1.3%. So it took a mean of 7.7 years to initiate insulin after the start of the last OAD in people taking 2 or more OADs, and that means the HbA1c was 8.85 at the time of insulin initiation. Absolutely yes. See, this is what is called the therapeutic inertia. This is what is called the clinician's inertia. This is what is called the therapeutic myopia. Whatever it may be, you call like the patient's inertia or the doctor's inertia. It is the reason like not responding in time, in proper time. The early initiation of insulin is not done. You are doing much harm to the patient. That is the take home message, please. And now this is the need of our, see, overcoming the inertia. So what I said, the clinical inertia, the therapeutic inertia, and the clinical myopia. The term clinical inertia has been used to refer the underuse of effective therapies and interventions despite a wealth of evidence regarding the benefits in preventing serious negative outcomes. Simply you can translate like when the patient is in in need of insulin, if you don't give the patient insulin and you put him on some other OAD or something else you add, you are not going to achieve anything. That is called the clinical inertia. The wider concept of clinical inertia also encompasses the deficits in care provision, such as a lack of appropriate screening or appropriate referrals wherever it is applicable. And coming to the therapeutic inertia, the failure to advance or de-intensify the treatment is called defined as therapeutic inertia, and lack of timely adjustment to the treatment regime when a patient's treatment goals are not met. This is about therapeutic inertia. And clinical myopia is failure to give preference to the long-term benefits of treatment. Intensification may represent a common mechanism underlying both the patient non-adherence and the physician clinical inertia, such as the failure is termed as the clinical myopia. So it's high time, it's need of our to come out of this clinical inertia, the therapeutic inertia and the clinical myopia. And you can see clinicians often wait for the worsening of hyperglycemia or complications to arise before optimizing the treatment. On the left hand side, you can very clearly see even when the A1C is somewhere around some 9 plus, the HbA1c of 9 plus, the patient is put on diet as usual, and the OAD monotherapy was started after some time, and the OAD combinations were used, and the OAD uptitrations were done. So OAD plus insulin initiation was done, but at a very later stage. And then OAD plus the insulin intensification was done at much later period. That is the time when the patient landed up in complications or something else when happened. Okay, so you can see it never touched the baseline of A1C here. You can see this. It is all the time in between 7 to 8.3 or 7 to not even 7, it is 7.5 to at least somewhere around some 9. See, never it came down to the target like 6.5 or even 7 at least even. And where this is the traditional stepwise approach what we were taught in 1990s, 3 decades ago. It was the traditional stepwise approach, and now the funda is hit hard and hit early. That is the funda in treating diabetes or the hypertension or the dyslipidemia. That will fetch you to prevent the complications in the long term. So here you can see on the early intensive approach on the right hand side, you can see when the A1C was 9 plus, the diet, the OAD monotherapy was started, and very fast the OAD combinations were used, and OAD uptitrations also were used, and the insulin initiation to the existing OADs was done very fast, and insulin intensification also was done very fast. Thereby you can see the A1C was all the time in between 6.5 to 7%. This is what that's what I said. You can see the two different graphs where the traditional stepwise approach and where the early initiation of insulin was applied. You can clearly see this part. You can clearly see the difference in the reductions of A1C. And now the consensus improving glucose management, 10 steps to get more patients with type 2 diabetes to glycemic goal. That is, aim for good glycemic control and monitor glycosylated hemoglobin every 3 months, in addition to regular glucose self-monitoring, that is SMBG or CGMS, whichever is applicable, and aggressively manage hyperglycemia, hypertension and dyslipidemia with the same intensity to obtain the best patient outcome, and refer all newly diagnosed patients to a unit specialized in diabetes care wherever it is possible and applicable, and address the underlying pathophysiology, including the treatment of insulin resistance which is of paramount importance in type 2 diabetes. The basic culprit is not the insulinopenia in the South Indian, the South Asian population, that is the Indian continent. It is the insulin resistance that is the culprit, which is which predisposes to the type 2 diabetes actually. After 3 months, if patients are not at the target HbA1c, consider combination therapy and initiate combination therapy or insulin immediately for all patients with HbA1c of more than 9 at the time of diagnosis. This is evidence based medicine, that is by the standards of medical care for diabetes by the American Diabetes Association. It always says whenever you see the patient, even at the first time also the A1C is more than 9, it's high time you have to start the insulin, irrespective whether the patient is in ketosis or whether the patient is in HHNS. Okay, and use the combinations of oral anti-diabetic agents, complementary mechanisms of action. That is the oral anti-diabetic drugs with different actions of mechanisms, like you have the insulin the sensitizers like Begvanits or the metformin and the pioglitazone, and the insulin secretagogues like again the sulfonylurea secretagogues and the non-sulfonylurea secretagogues, and you have the alpha glucosidase inhibitors, you have the DPP4 inhibitors, you have the SGLT2 inhibitors, and of course the injectables become like okay the insulin and the GLP-1 analogs, and they implement a multi and interdisciplinary team approach to diabetes management to encourage patient education and self-care and share responsibility for patients achieving glucose goal. And the patients remain on multiple OAD therapies for a too long period. For you, this is the SOLVE study. Yes, this is you can see the A1C is somewhere around the SOLVE study. A1C was somewhere around 8.9%, and the clinical inertia exists despite the benefits of timely glycemic control, the guidelines encouraging earlier usage of insulin. Insulin initiation in SOLVE, the average A1C was 8.9, and you can very clearly see in this graph the 41% had HbA1c of around or more than 9% in this particular SOLVE trial, and 22% had HbA1c of equal to or more than 10%. That is, there is a pretty lot quantity of clinical inertia where the insulin was not initiated at the need of hour actually. That is the take home message. And the final part, coming to that, the making up of the deficiency of insulin without delay. Yeah, by the time the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes is done, the patients could have lost somewhere around some 80% of their beta cell function. That's what I said. That was published in Diabetes Care in 2013 by Ralph A. DiFranco in the August supplement actually. So when you see this graph, the early type 2 diabetes is really not that early, absolutely. Yeah, in the graph you see this the circle is the lean diabetes and the square is the obese diabetes, and you find the here the first arrow, the pink arrow you see here, subjects with 2 hour postprandial glucose less than 140 milligram per deciliter during OGTT have 50% decrease in the beta cell function. That's what I said. The theory started evolving and differentiating, and you find the subjects with 2 hour postprandial glucose less than 200 milligram per deciliter during the OGTT have 70 to 80% decrease in the beta cell function. But the practical question here arises is when the patient has got less than like somewhere around some 80% of functioning the loss of beta cell, that is the existing will be only 20% of the existing beta cell mass is there according to Professor DiFranco. When I asked him the question, there was no answer from him actually. I personally asked him. So when the patients are badly running short of this particular the functioning beta cell function, like more than 80% of beta cell is dead, and as per the theory postulated by him, and no OAD would work when there is a functioning reserve goes below 25%. So most of the time in our clinical scenario, we see that majority of our patients with type 2 diabetes mellitus, they respond well to our the oral drugs. Whatsoever you start in the initial period, initial 2-3 years, you start with metformin, you add sulfonylurea, you add thiazolidine or you add even acarbose or the meglitol or even the oglibose, whatever you add, the patient responds, and we don't find an answer from the author, this particular Professor DiFranco. And you can clearly see that the beta cell function declines as the type 2 diabetes progresses, and all the time type 2 diabetes is a progressive disease. So by the time a diagnosis of T2DM is made, a considerable percentage of beta cell has been already lost, and the deposition index is a standard measure of beta cell function. And finally, to conclude, the early type 2 diabetes is really not that early, because it takes a lot of time to see a patient becoming over diabetes from stage of normoglycemia, that is NGT, to the IFG, impaired fasting glucose, and the IGT, and to the frank over diabetes. And how early is early? When starting insulin. Insulin can be started, there is no point like how early is early. Every minute is precious, every hour is precious, every day is precious. So as early as you start insulin, that is early initiation of insulin. So the much better would be the prognosis of the patient. So insulin can be started at different points along the natural history of the type 2 diabetes. At the time of diagnosis of diabetes, you can start the insulin, promising newer evidence showcasing better control. And at the time of secondary OAD failure, you can start insulin, but it's of no use because we feel it will control glycemia better. And at the time of chronic complications, you start insulin because we have no other choice. But it's too late. These two are too late. At the time of diagnosis, or when the A1C is somewhere around more than 9, it is high time you have to start the patient on insulin. Here there are multiple methods of starting insulin. Either you can start with the basal insulin, or the patient is along with the existing OADs, you can start the insulin. And even if the basal insulin fails, like the maximum doses of basal insulin is 40 units per day. If it doesn't achieve the serve the purpose, you can switch over to either to the biphasic premixed, or even the basal plus, or the basal bolus regime also. And timely and appropriate use of insulin is essential for good glycemic control. And the insulin therapy positively alters the course of disease progression. You can very clearly see the two diagrams wherein the dotted one is the intensive therapy, and the straight line the dark blue color is conventional therapy. You can clearly see the difference between the early initiation, early insulin therapy, the Indian evidence. The early intensified insulin therapy in newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes leads to the sustained improvement in glycemic control and improved beta cell function, and the evaluated use of insulin at the time of diagnosis of type 2 diabetes and its effects on glycemic control and beta cell function, and which leads to the progressive observational study in 122 symptomatic newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes adults with glycosylated hemoglobin of more than 9%, and the patients treated with premix insulin and changed to oral agent and followed up for 3 years. And change in the fasting plasma glucose and the postprandial glucose, the baseline to 36 months. You can clearly see the blue one and the this is red one. So the fasting is the blue one and the red one is the postprandial glucose. You can clearly see this the reductions from the baseline to the end of third year, that is the 36 months. And you find the change in the glycosylated hemoglobin baseline to the 36 months. It is somewhere around some 7.15. Breaking treatment inertia and timely insulin initiation provides better glycemic control. The RSSDI, that is that recommendations for the insulin initiation in patients with
Audio lost. No, Dr. Syed, it is coming now. Hello, are you able to hear?
am I audible? No.
I'm again rejoining. Okay, sir. Net issue, sir. Net issue. Phone నుంచి connect చేయడం better. Sir, rejoining, sir. Rejoining.
Ma'am, actually, it's not a mistake from SANS platform. It is there is some
Net-
kind of a
network.
technical glitch in the load in the platform. I think so. Now you can hear me. Praveen, you can hear me, right?
Yes, you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
now share
you-
the screen now. You can share the screen now.
You are very much audible, Dr. Syed.
Yes, sir. Sir, if I will ask you, sir, but the reason behind this growth in the platform, I think so it got closed.
Yeah, maybe.
And not because of the systems, because of platforms.
Yeah.
Sir, it was, sir, because the real estate is just a two slide before it can go back, sir.
Yeah.
I think the as far as situation
Yeah,
was not
yeah,
good.
okay. Okay.
This
The,
one
the,
was cross slide, up to the
yeah.
22nd, I think so. Go back
20.
before. Yeah, this one.
This one? Okay.
Yeah.
The early insulin
Sir,
therapy.
this one- Yes, sir. This one, the here for next slide. Next slide.
This is okay, right? From here.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, the change in the. Yeah, I'm sorry for the technical glitch. Yeah. The change in the fasting plasma glucose.
You can't see you, sir, so I have requested to the webcam, sir. Yeah, now I can see you, sir.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Change in the fasting plasma glucose and the postprandial glucose, starting from the baseline to the 36 months, you can see the fasting plasma glucose in the blue line, and the postprandial plasma glucose in the red line. You can clearly see the graph getting flattened, the curve getting very much flattened, and the fasting being somewhere around some say 101.52 milligram per deciliter to the post lunch 153.2 milligram per deciliter at the end of third year, that is baseline to the 36 months, that is start of premix insulin, the baseline, and the second month change over to oral agents, and at the end of the third year. So the initiation of insulin is very much required at the early period where there is functioning beta cell mass. This is the take home message for everyone. See, this is called the early initiation of insulin. This hypothesis is postulated by Novo Nordisk people, and we should all the time congratulate the Novo Nordisk people who have educated the Indian doctors actually. Not only the Indian doctors, I think even in the abroad. In the beginning days, that's what I am telling. Like 3 to 4 decades ago, the scenario was totally different. There was poor understanding on diabetes, and at that particular time, these people took up the challenge of educating the doctors first, thereby getting an awareness in the doctors with regards to people were damn scared about the insulins, and when I started my practice as an endocrinologist, I had nothing, just a bovine insulin and a porcine insulin. I never had seen this human insulin. So somewhere ago, some 2.5 decades ago, I think again we saw this, and we stopped the bovine. We moved on to porcine. We stopped even the porcine. We just moved on to the Novo Nordisk insulins, the genetically rDNA engineered human insulins we started, and at the end of what matters is not the continuation of insulin, the initiation of insulin. The baseline you can very clearly see in this diagram. The cartoon you can very clearly see the start of premix insulin at the baseline, and the second month itself change over to oral agents, and this is called the legacy effect. The legacy effect continued until the third year, that is the end of 36 months, and we should remember this. This is the take home message for everyone. And change in the HbA1c, likewise you find the A1C in the blue line, and the A1C around 7. This is the straight line, red line, that is somewhere around 7, and baseline it was 11.47. See, you can see the baseline HbA1c was before starting the premix insulin it was 11.47, and after we started insulin it came back to 7.43, and after that the change over to the oral agents, and again it went up to 6.39, 6.44, 6.67 and 7.24, and again 6.77 at the end of 36 months, that is 3 years, and it was a steady line, almost more or less maintained with the control, that is the 7% A1C, and at the end it was 7.15, which is reasonably good. And always remember that the target should be like if it is an uncomplicated with no comorbidities, you put it as somewhere around 7% of HbA1c as your target A1C, and if the patient is young and he can tolerate the intensification of the therapy, so you can put it as like 6.5% to the young people who don't get into hypoglycemia. And as the age increases and as the comorbidities increase, like as the patient moves to 70s or 80s, or the comorbidities like diabetic kidney disease is there, he has got heart failure, he's got the coronary artery disease, or the atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, he's got the retinopathy, and keeping all these comorbidities, you need to go for a relaxed the targets like the post lunch or random casual should be somewhere around some 200. The A1C can be relaxed from 7 to 8%, even to 8.5% also at the age of 80 to 85 with multiple comorbidities. So there is no fixed hard funda with regards to the fasting plasma glucose and the postprandial or the casual plasma glucose or even the A1C. That depends on the condition of the patient, whether he is fragile, whether he is very stable and with no comorbidities, or with advanced age with comorbidities, or at risk of hypoglycemia, not at risk of hypoglycemia. These are all the various factors which dictate the terms whether the A1C should be somewhere around 6.5 or 7 or 7.5 or 8 or 8.5. And breaking the treatment inertia and timely insulin initiation provides better glycemic control, and the RSSDA recommendations for insulin initiation in patients with type 2 diabetes. As newer and effective OADs have been made available, it's recommended to consider insulin in cases where patient fails to achieve or maintain A1C levels after administration of 3 OADs, out of which one should be a newer agent. That is, either it should be a DPP4 inhibitor or an SGLT2 inhibitor or a GLP1 analog. And if patient is intolerant to any individual agent or combination of the agents, and though there are several new oral agents available, their glucose lowering potential is relatively less when compared with insulin, and hence insulin should never be delayed if HbA1c remains high. That's what I have been telling from the beginning. When the A1C is high, that indicates that the pancreas is at stress and strain. So that is the time you need to give some rest to the pancreas. That is, you don't need to use the endogenous insulin. You have to use the exogenous insulin. See, that is the funda what we follow in fractures. Why we give rest to the fractured limb, whatever it may be. It is the rest will heal the wound. So same is the case with the pancreas. When it is stressed out, the pancreas is stressed out. You cannot whip the pancreas because that cannot function anymore. That is the time we have to give rest to the pancreas. And by giving rest to the pancreas, that is nothing but not whipping the pancreas is by using the exogenous insulin from outside we need to use, and you should not delay that particular process of initiation of insulin. That is hypothesized by this particular Novo Nordisk people, which is very apt till today. Even after the emergence of so many novel drugs, still insulin remains the basic modality of treatment, and it's a very good ornament in the armamentarium of our the anti-diabetic medications. And the RSSI and the ESI, the Endocrine Society of India, the clinical practice recommendations for the management of type 2 diabetes mellitus 2020. And if glucose targets are not achieved with 2 agents, start third oral agent like alpha glucosidase inhibitor or DPP4 inhibitor as SGLT2 inhibitor or thiazolidine what we have is only the leftover one is the pioglitazone, and or the start insulin or glucagon like peptide GLP1 receptor agonist. And the insulin therapy should be considered in all patients failing to achieve glycemic targets on 3 oral agents, and consider initiating insulin in type 2 diabetes patients with symptomatic severe hypoglycemia or unstable state, and initiate with once daily basal insulin, once daily premixed coformulation insulin, or the twice daily premixed insulin, either alone or in combination with the existing OADs. That's what I told you. There are several ways of the initiation of insulin. Like you can start with the basal insulin or the premixed insulin. I don't agree to this once a day premixed. But okay, once a day basal plus can be used, not once a day premixed. Premixed, bibasic premixed is always twice a day, and twice a day premixed insulin either alone or in the combination of the existing OADs based upon the patient's age, clinical features, glucose profile, risk of hypoglycemia, and patient's preferences. And insulin has got the best glycemic efficacy and offers several extra glycemic benefits. Yes, and you can see the reductions with this particular glycosylated hemoglobin with starting from lifestyle to metformin to insulin to sulfonylureas to thiazolidinediones to GLP-1 receptor agonists and alpha glucoside inhibitors and the glenites and the DPP-4 inhibitors and the SGLT2 inhibitors, and you find the maximum reduction of A1C is seen only with the insulin, and the multiple effects of the extra glycemic benefits of insulin you can see, like it's an anti-inflammatory in action, it's anti-accident in action, it is anti-thrombotic in action, cardioprotective, neuroprotective, and anti-apoptotic. Like, okay, the apoptosis is defined as the programmed cell death, so it is anti-apoptotic. And apart from this, it's glucose lowering, the vasodilatation effect, and then the platelet inhibition and the beta cell rest. That's what I said, that the giving rest to the pancreas is like beta cell rest and improvement in the function. And so factors facilitating success in insulin initiation, the factors here mentioned are they offer direct control on postprandial glucose, offer direct control on fasting plasma glucose, simple initiation, suitable in cases of delayed insulin therapy, easy to explain and understand, and easy monitoring and easy titration, and use of a single device, and offer subsequent incentivization of the convenience. So when compared to the once daily insulin degludec aspart, that is Ryzodec, when compared to the OD basal insulin, so you have all the advantages, all are yes for this. The once a day, the basal plus, this is called the basal plus, a new term, that is the like when you add the basal insulin is added to the bolus insulin, giving a single shot is called basal plus. And when you compare with this postprandial control, you cannot achieve with the basal insulin. You can achieve the fasting plasma control, and simple initiation is basal because it is once a day, and it is not suitable in cases of delayed insulin therapy, and easy to explain and understand. Yes, it is also yes OD basal insulin, and it is yes for easy monitoring and titration also, and use of single device, yes, it is yes. And coming to the summary, this is the take home message. Good glycemic control is very important to lower the risk of future complications, and the type 2 diabetes is progressive in nature, and when 3 drugs are insufficient, the timely initiation of insulin should not be delayed, and co-formulation insulin degludec and aspart is a simple and convenient solution which is a basal plus insulin for achieving better glycemic control in Indian people and type 2 diabetes who are uncontrolled on multiple oral anti-diabetic drugs. Thank you very much for your patient listening. Thank you once again.